Well, it certainly is a beautiful day outside, and it is a good Sunday for this congregation. Not only do we get to come together and worship God and just be together as normal, but we get to welcome the Boswell family here, and we're excited about the new things we're going to be accomplishing this year and the new work that can be done. We need more reapers to go out into the field because we believe that the fields are white for harvest. And so just looking forward to good things this year. Before we get into today's lesson, I want to mention a couple of things. Number one, there are still a lot of postcards left to invite our friends and neighbors to the singing. So you can either hand them out or mail them. They actually take a postcard stamp, which is even cheaper than a normal one. So that was the point of getting them small. So please invite people. This is a good way to perhaps get people in the door who may not be willing to come on a Sunday morning, but they enjoy listening to and singing Christian music, and it could be a very good opportunity. But plus for us, it is just good to come together and worship with as many souls as we can. And on our Bible and reading and writing plans, if you are on our plan to read through the Old Testament in a year, remember it jumps around a little bit. It doesn't go straight through. If you want one of those, there is one in the back too. But if you're on the one that the majority of us are working on together, we take a little break now that we're past Job. We're going to go do a few Psalms, and I think that should be 13 through 16. And then we're going to start going through the book of Proverbs in our reading. So this will be a different kind of reading, very much, than the words of Job, but still very profitable. And if you're doing our scripture writing plan, this week we are writing another passage about building, and specifically about Nehemiah, and Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17 through 20, writing those out and meditating on those verses throughout the week. We'll talk more about that later in the year, that particular set of verses, but Nehemiah is one of the greatest examples that I can think of. Now, when you think about builders in the Bible, you might be wondering, why am I going to Caleb? Because, you probably think about Noah building an ark, and you think about people building a tabernacle, Solomon building a temple, Nehemiah building the wall, those sorts of things. And we don't necessarily read so much about, Caleb picking up the bricks and the stone or the hammers and putting things together. But he does choose to make his permanent home, and we learn some lessons from where he does that, from his attitude as he does that, where he establishes his home. And Caleb is one of my favorite Bible characters to talk about the idea of courage, taking a stand. So this is the slide you're probably starting to get used to if you're a member here, and we're going to, the first Sunday of each month, as long as I'm able and healthy, we'll be doing our lesson on these subjects. But Caleb is our first builder. Next month we'll talk about some builders of the tabernacle and craftsmen, maybe some other uncommon characters that you're not used to hearing about. And then after that, we'll probably go on to some much more familiar characters as we talk about building. But we want to talk about having courage. We've already talked about building on the right foundation, building as God builds, and working with God. And so now we're going to talk about the courage it takes. Because, truth be told, to take on a big project, it takes some courage, doesn't it? Whether that be here on earth, a physical project, to take a step to try something new, but even more so when it comes to spiritual projects, to take on something new, to take on something difficult, perhaps to take on something that you have a lot of opposition from your peers or from the world around you. But Caleb is somebody, we'll talk about his exact age at this moment later, but if you look in Numbers chapter 13, we find a couple of things out about Caleb. But as far as I know, this is the first he's mentioned in Numbers 13. They are about ready to head to the Promised Land, is what they are wanting to do. And so they say, we're going to pick a representative from each tribe to spy out the land. And Caleb is the one who's chosen from Judah. Now there is, he's distinguished enough to be the one that's chosen and set aside for this purpose. He's already sort of distinguished himself in his tribe. That's Numbers 13:6, where we are given his name. And by the way, how many of these other spies do you know? You ever thought about that? Most of us probably don't remember Shaphat, the son of Hori, right? We don't remember all these other guys in here. We remember Caleb and Joshua, right? And there's a reason for that. God records names so we see who's remembered and who's forgotten. Who is worth copying and imitating, and worth those who are destroyed for their lack of faith. But they get back from this spying mission, and I guess as a kid, I always thought they just like snuck over and snuck back in one day. This is a little bit more involved than that. But at the end of 40 days, we find in verse 25 of chapter 13, we'll pick that up. Numbers 13 and verse 25. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. So you remember they had this cluster of grapes that was so large that they had to carry it on a pole between a couple of guys, right? So this is a land that is bountiful. Everywhere they looked, they found things as God said. They told him and said, "We went in to see where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." That's one of those Bible sentences you wish would just stop there. My version says, "Nevertheless," or you might say, "But." "Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek's living in the land of the Negev, the Hittites and the Jebusites, the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and the side of the Jordan." By the way, those were all the enemies that they were destined to destroy. And it's no joke. What do they think? God's just going to dissolve these guys without any work? And these descendants of Anak, those are men of great stature. The only ones that end up surviving are going to end up around the Philistines. So we've got Goliath and his crew in the time of David that are kind of the last remnants of these type of people. So very strong and scary folk living in the land. Amalek's living in the land. The Amalekites are some of these big enemies, and all these various other tribes of Canaanites. So Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." So notice that Caleb doesn't dispute the report. He says, yes, it was fruitful and profitable, and yes, there are these enemies and there are giants, but we will just go take possession of it. It's just going to happen. He stood up and, like I said, he didn't dispute that there's going to be hard things. But the man who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone, spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants. All the people who we saw in it are men of great size. There we also saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. We became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." We were just nothings. We were just nothings. We were grasshoppers. What threat is a grasshopper to a giant, right? And so Caleb gives this good report. He seems to be the spokesperson. Joshua certainly gives the good report as well. In the next chapter, we'll see a little more of that. But he is kind of the leader individual here. But these other 10 guys convinced the whole crowd. No, we shouldn't do it. It's just too scary. It's just too much. But his confidence in the face of every other report, that's hard. To be the only one that says we can when everyone else says we can't. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and all the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we have died in the land of Egypt, or would that we have died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into the land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones have become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt." It's gotten bad. Our old way of life, at least we were happy. Were they happy? That's looking at the past with the rose-colored glasses kind of thing, right? It was not so good. They were slaves. They were worked to the bone. Their infants were threatened with the death penalty. The infant boys were supposed to be drowned in the Nile River. And yet, it's just too hard. I just can't do it. There's one phrase that we still, I've mentioned it many times, I think, in our house. We try to work on our children not saying. We don't say, I can't do it. We can say, I'm having a little trouble, or I need help, but we can't say, and I said can't, right? We shouldn't say, I can't. We shouldn't say, I can't. And we're working on it, but sometimes I see why they're called the children of Israel. Because if the 4-year-old has trouble with the shoes, I can't find him. I can't find him anywhere. Okay, well, don't say I can't. What do we need to say? I can't put these Legos together just right. I can't button my pants, or whatever kind of problem's going on. Well, settle down. What's the problem? Let's talk about it. It's okay to say this is hard. It's okay to ask for help. But to say I can't when God said you can is a lack of faith. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly and the congregation of the sons of Israel. Now Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. They spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he'll bring us into the land. Give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. The protection has been removed from them. The Lord is with us. Do not fear them. A couple of things to note about this. If the Lord's on our side, there's no doubt that we're going to win. Also, do you know what he equated complaining with? Rebellion. Do you ever complain? My life's so hard. I can't do it. It's too much. Why would God do this to me? Why couldn't it be as easy as it was back then? God says you're a rebel. Complaint equals rebellion. And I'm not saying, oh, well, I ached today. I mean, we're all going to have aches and pains. But this is a complaint. Someone is angry with God rather than thankful. They're not working. They're considering going back. That's rebellion. Now, Joshua and Caleb give them courage. They say, they try to at least. They say, we can do this. But notice what they're trying to do. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. They were going to kill them. Kill the messenger who said we can do it. So then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. So Moses, he does actually beg that God won't kill them all immediately. But they're going to die, right? Now God promised Caleb and Joshua will enter the promised land. Look down in verse 22. Surely all the men who've seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit, has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he has entered. He and his descendants shall take possession of it. He has a different spirit. He followed me fully. He has courage. He took a stand. He says he will enter it. He will possess it. His family will live there. You know, it's been said before that the book of Numbers is actually just a story of who's going to die. At the very beginning, they count the fighting men. What do they have? 603,550. How many of those don't make it? 603,400, or, do my bad math here, 548, right? 548. So, we've got 2 that make it. 2 make it in the promised land. By the way, if you want a divine commentary on this section, go look at Hebrews 3 and 4. He talks about those who complained and their bodies fell in the wilderness. He equates disobedience and disbelief with all these things. But God promised Caleb will go in. Caleb will take it, he and his family. Now, Caleb's later years, because we don't really read a ton about Caleb. There's a couple of moments here and there he's mentioned. But in Joshua 14, they have gone in and started conquering the enemy. They've started dividing out the land, and Caleb shows up. Caleb and Joshua, by the way, are by far the oldest people left. Because remember, nobody else will be above 60 years old. They're really the only two old-timers left. And I'm sure they had a grand reputation because of their faith along the way. And Joshua 14, starting in verse 6. Then the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me, in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. I brought word back to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of my people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot is trodden will be an inheritance to you, and to your children forever, because you followed the Lord my God fully. Now behold, the Lord has let me live just as he spoke these 45 years, from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, when Israel walked in the wilderness. Now behold, I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me, as my strength was then, so my strength is now for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I'll drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So Joshua blessed him, and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. And therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, until this day, because he followed the Lord God of Israel fully. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. But then the land had rest from war. So what did he do? 45 years, he watched people fall for disbelief, for complaining, for just this lack of faith in God, rebellion. And Caleb said, I'll get it. I'll get the land. And so they've done their first conquering. 45 years later, he said, God's going to keep his promise. That's the long-term view of faith. You know how many people I've seen, they start, and 3 years later they say, life's hard. I'm going to give up. I'm going to walk away. Not Caleb. 45 years. Now, but it's not just, hey, give me this place that's nice and comfortable. By the way, there were a couple of tribes who did. They said, we like it on this other side of Jordan. It's a great land, and we don't want to have to go all the way over there. So can we just stay here? We'll just stop short of the promised land. That is in direct contrast to Caleb, and I think it's meant to be in the text. And we got 3 tribes. They end up being taken first, by the way, in captivity in the future. Caleb, what does he say? We walked in this land where there was giants. Maybe the giants are still there. So maybe God will be with me. Give me that. That's what I want. I don't know about you, but I'd love that courage when I'm 85. Now, there's a lot of spectacular things we'll talk about Caleb, but maybe most spectacular, he says, I'm just as strong about going to battle. I don't know if he means, well, God's with me just as much, or if he actually is this really strong 85-year-old man. But he's ready to go. Nothing's going to hold him back. Now, Joshua 15 actually tells us there were 3 descendants of those giants. And what did he do? He drove them out. And he set up a permanent home for him and his family. 85-year-old man goes and takes the most giant-infested territory and makes it his home. He doesn't pick the easy route. He could have retired. He was literally the oldest man in the country, in the whole nation. He could have just taken it easy. No, he's ready to go and take something hard. And that's where he built his cities. That's where he settled his family. And he inspires his family to, and his whole tribe. Judah becomes this mighty tribe. He inspires them to some of the greatest victories of all. And the first victories of all, if you read the book of Judges, that they go and take possession firmly of their land more so than any other tribe. And his nephew, Othniel, ends up becoming the very first judge of the nation of Israel when they need a judge. And his daughter even. There are very few women mentioned in the book of Judges, and the ones that are mentioned for very specific reasons. She is the one to be emulated. She's the one that is this godly woman, and she wants more of the land. She's like, we're going to get this land. We're going to take possession of it. And asks her father for it. He inspires his family and his tribe to further victories. And why is Hebron important? If you remember just a little bit of Bible history, it becomes a sanctuary city. We learn about that in Joshua 21. So this region becomes a place that people can come to have their life saved. And the priests and Aaron's family get to take possession of this land because Caleb goes and drives out the giants. The whole land has rest in this area because of it. And when King David is faced with civil war and opposition, Ishbosheth has set himself up as king. Where does David set himself up as king? Actually, the people set him up as king. Hebron. Hebron is where David becomes king and reigns for 7 years. Why did he have Hebron to go to? Because Caleb went and took possession of this land. And just like Caleb drove out giants, David was a king who drives out giants. But notice a couple of things. First of all, did you notice in this passage in Joshua, it calls them a Kenizzite? Who were the Kenizzites? In Genesis chapter 15, we find out the Kenizzites were actually a different tribe. There was Kenites and Kenizzites in that passage. Now, Jethro, Moses' relative, was a Kenite, and it appears that it would have been Caleb's either father or one of his descendants that was this Kenizzite. What does that mean? That means he wasn't just born completely into his faith. That his family were added to the tribe of Judah. And they were the ones that were chosen to represent them as spies and as leaders. Not even a native born, but he was the strongest as far as taking a stand. I think that's powerful. But he still was the one chosen. One of only two to survive his generation. It's pointed out in Numbers 26 that they followed the Lord fully, that they were the only ones that survived. And think about this. I put his younger years, his older years. At age 40 is when he took a stand. Now, your stand might be younger, your stand might be older, but when you're called upon to take your stand for whatever it is, we'll talk about practical applications. Are you going to take it? Now, I'm not saying this about this church, but I've been to many churches. I've been a part of many churches in my life. And there's this whole missing generation in a lot of churches. There tends to be young families, and there tends to be quite a few older members, but there tends to also be this gap in the middle of middle-aged folks who they didn't really have the faith of their parents, and then there's some young people that are looking for examples, and it's hard to find them. We're blessed to have a good spectrum here, but that's not the case in much of the country. You got young families that wish there was more middle-aged faithful, and you've got more who are older who wish that their kids were still faithful, but they're not. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But at age 40, he says, we're going in. And all along the way, he stayed faithful. When he was 85, he was just as ready to go in. He had just as much faith to take it. And you might argue it takes more faith for someone who's 85 to go and fight. When he was 40, he was at his peak, perhaps. But at age 85, he might have said he's at his peak, but still, he's 85 years old, facing giants. And I like the way that Numbers 14 puts it, the way God put it. He has a different spirit. It's just not normal to be that way. It's normal to complain. God says, don't be normal. It's normal to be fearful. God says, don't be fearful. Deuteronomy, or Numbers 14, Numbers 32, Deuteronomy 1, and then these three passages. 6 times we are told he follows the Lord fully. It reminds me of another builder, Noah, when God says that, according to all that God said, he did. And by the way, that's the only person in the Bible is Joshua and Caleb that's ever said of. And it's only said once of Joshua. 6 times it said, he followed the Lord fully. Everything God said, he did. That's what this congregation needs. A whole church full of people who follow the Lord fully. Whether you're 40, whether you're 85, whether you're native born and you've been raised in the church, or whether you've not. Make this faith your own. Trust in your God. God is going to keep his side of the promises. Amen. So think about what our struggles might be. This is where I just want to talk about maybe some practical applications. So, have you ever taken a stand and the world doesn't really get it? Last year, our theme book was 1 Peter, and we talked about how some of our old friends and buddies are going to wonder why we don't run with them into excess, the partying, the drinking, sexual immorality, things like that. They're going to wonder why we don't live like them. And you'll say, the time's past for that. I'm done with that. I've moved on. I'm on to something better, looking forward to an inheritance. And what's going to happen? People will persecute you. They'll malign you. They'll insult you. Are you still taking the stand? If someone looked at your life versus a life of someone in the world, would they see any difference? Is the only difference you maybe come to church on Sundays and perhaps Wednesdays? Or is there an actual, literal difference? And it's not that we do good things to stand out, but that we can't help but stand out because we do good things. Taking a stand on what you're going to watch or listen to or read. Taking a stand on things you won't do at work, or how you work. You work like a responsible, hardworking person. You don't complain about the boss. You do your best. You don't steal from the company. How are you living? Are you taking stands that are unpopular? Someone talks badly about God or religion, and you are fearful, but you take a stand and say, that's not okay. I don't agree with that. You talk different. Your language is not crude or disgusting like perhaps among some of your peers at work. What is different about you and the culture? What about you and your church? Or you and just Christians you know? Have you ever taken a stand and you don't really get the same enthusiasm from others? Maybe it is on something like, for example, entertainment. And you make very conscientious choices for your family. By the way, I do understand there are differences and there is no one right way to do it. But you take great care for what you watch and listen to and read. Or you take great care in what you wear and what your children put on. And others, it seems, completely disagree. In fact, maybe they will tell you that. Like, you're worrying too much. They'll hear it anyway at school. Or, I hear it at work all the time. But you make a stand. And it can come in any sort of issue. Maybe it comes in following the Lord's commands about withdrawing fellowship. Maybe some people, I'm not going to do that. Or they have all sorts of reasons, but you take a hard line. It could be an evangelism. You leave your comfort zone. Evangelism is scary and awkward and uncomfortable. And it's not facing a giant in battle, but for many of us, the anxiety of talking to somebody else is paralyzing. And other people are comfortable to not do it, because that's someone else's job. I know some people that have literally made themselves sick throwing up from the nerves, but they talk to people anyway. That's what God wants. Not that He doesn't want you to throw up. God wants you to do it anyway, to do the hard thing. Whether it be, like I said, in what you listen to, watch, wear, how you evangelize, how you teach, the way you raise your children, the way you run your marriage, the way you work, whatever. God wants you to do the hard things, the uncomfortable things. Christianity isn't comfortable. I know I mention this a lot, but in 2 Timothy, when Paul talks to Timothy about kindling afresh the gift in him, the literal Greek word there is to poke with a sharp stick. And so Paul is saying, you need a poker. Yesterday I was at my brother's house, and he has a wood stove in his basement, and he does a lot of heating his house that way. Let's just say it's a good thing I don't have to rely on my family's heat coming from a wood stove. I've had a lot to learn on doing it. But sometimes you take the poker in there to get the coals going, right? And you get things started. And it takes a sharp poke that hurts to get us to be people of action. Kindle afresh the gift. God did not call us to a spirit of fear and timidity. Power and love. Those are the things. God will be with us. Don't fear. That's how Paul could write from prison, facing death. And he says, I'm ready to be poured out as a drink offering. I'm ready to face the lions. I can handle anything. I don't fear because God's with me. So ask yourself, and this is kind of drawing our lesson to a close, how much do you really trust God's promises? Do you trust that He'll take care of you? Or do you let anxiety rule your life? Do you trust that the gospel actually reaches people? Or are you just holding it back because it might make you unpopular or uncomfortable? Do you trust that God's way to raise your family or God's way to have a marriage is the best way? Or are you doing things your own way anyway? Do you trust that it matters what you wear and what you watch and what you listen to? Or you just do God's things anyway? Or do you just do the world's things anyway? Trust God. Do things God's way. How do you react when you're faced with opposition from the world? Do you cower in fear? Do you run away? Do you give up? By the way, God gave us a great place to get that sharp poke with a stick, didn't He? It's church. Coming together with the congregation gives us the energy, the perspective, the encouragement that we need to go out there and do what we're supposed to do. This is to help us do that out there. How do you react when faced with opposition from your own? Other Christians say, well, that's no big deal. You can do that thing. I do that thing all the time. Do you cave? If you are firmly grounded and believe that something's right or wrong, you just give up when someone else makes you feel like you're good at two shoes or something like that. And I like Caleb. He's a character like Daniel. We know about him when he was younger and older. And he's a good example whether you're young, middle-aged, or older, right? Where are you in Caleb's life right now? We've got some middle-aged people here I think are taking some stands. Are you committed to keep doing that? You are the future wisdom of the church, right? We have some really wise, giving, caring, wonderful older members. They're not going to be here. So who's going to do everything that they do when they're gone? It's you. And for the young people, guess what? You'll be at Caleb's middle age. And at every stage, trust God. And your trust doesn't waver. You don't retire easy. You don't take the easy route because you're done. Keep working, right? Now, your body may not be as ready to go fight battles at 85 as it was when it was 40. But as a Christian, are you ready to fight whatever battles you got to face? Is your faith in God just as strong, if not stronger? And will I choose the easy, safe, comfortable routes? Jesus had something to say about that, right? There's only really two routes your life can take. There is the easy way that most people take, the wide way, and it's easy to find because that's where everyone else is going. But there's a narrow gate, a narrow way which is difficult, and it does mean carrying a cross. But it is the way to go. Will you build your life? Will you build this church with courage, taking a stand, even if it means taking a stand against the world, even if it means taking a stand when others in the church don't take a stand? But you are committed to do the right thing, to stand like Caleb and Joshua, to be the only two that survive from the generation if that's what it takes. But no matter what, you will not compromise your faith. I think we got a lot of people in here that are ready to make those kind of commitments. If you're here today and you've never become a Christian, there's no better time to start that journey than now. We're here to help you. To be baptized, to have your sins washed away, to become a Christian for the first time. And if you are a Christian and you just need a poke with a sharp stick, if you need some encouragement, if you need to be built up, and there's a way we can help you do that, why don't you come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.